Who's next?
The defense would call Deputy David Duff.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Speak into the microphone, but don't get too close for
Go ahead, Mr. Escobar.
Good afternoon, Deputy Duff. Deputy Duff, would you please state your full name for the record?
David Wayne Duff II.
And how do you spell your last name?
D as in David, U as in Union, F as in Frank, F as in Frank.
Deputy Duff, would you give us a little bit of background concerning your professional experience?
I've been employed at the Pasco County Sheriff's Office since September of 2005. I've had service as a field training officer, a property crimes detective, and I'm currently a patrol corporal assigned to District 2.
Deputy, I am going to direct your attention to January the 13th of 2014 and ask you what division or what department were you employed with then?
I was employed at the Pasco Sheriff's Office as a property crimes detective.
Okay. And were you called out to the scene, or did you respond to the scene of the Cobb Theater on January the 13th of 2014?
I did.
Okay, and why did you do that?
We had reports of a shooting in one of the theaters.
Okay. And so how long did it take you to get to the Cobb Theater?
From the district office, it was about 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay. When you arrived there, you spoke to a Sergeant Fields, is that correct?
Correct.
And Sergeant Fields was the individual that gave you the instructions to start interviewing individuals, is that correct? And that day, in assisting major crimes with interviews, you interviewed 6 individuals.
I did.
Okay. Now, these 6 individuals that you interviewed were congregated in a concession area there at the front of the theater, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And when you first approached those individuals, meaning the people in the area, were talking.
I would assume so, yes, sir.
And so you were given a list of names, or were you just calling out people randomly?
Randomly.
You were just saying, hey, anybody here know something, and you would take them with you?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you would agree, would you not, that your preference that day would have been to go inside the theater, and that being Theater 10, to be able to get at least a view of the theater so that you could ask appropriate follow-up questions to these witnesses, correct?
Yes, sir.
But you were not allowed to do that.
No, sir.
Now, when you first approached that group out there, was that a pretty large group?
I don't recall the size of the people. There was a gathering of people.
When you first approached that group, you did not tell anyone in that group, hey, you're not supposed to discuss your case, or you're not supposed to discuss what you saw with anybody else.
I did not.
And certainly while you were there assisting major crimes, at no point in time did you ever hear anybody tell any group of people or any individual person you're not to discuss anything you saw in the theater with others.
I did not.
The first one that you interviewed was an individual by the name of Mr. Perez.
Yes, sir.
And you did not even know when you started interviewing Mr. Perez that Mr. Perez had filled out a written statement.
I did not.
In fact, you never even asked Mr. Perez if he had filled out a written statement.
I did not.
Your basic interviewing technique at that point for the major crimes unit was, what did you see?
Yes, sir.
You never asked Mr. Perez where he was specifically seated within the theater, correct?
No, sir.
You never asked Mr. Perez what the lighting conditions were in the theater, correct?
Did not.
You never asked Mr. Perez what the noise level in the theater was, correct?
I did not.
You never asked him what was playing on the screen, correct?
I did not.
You never even asked him where the incident took place, correct? Within the theater. Specifically.
No, sir.
Really, because of the fact that you were unfamiliar with the scene itself, you didn't know how to present follow-up questions.
Yes, sir.
Again, you would have preferred to have gone inside before you started these interviews.
Objection, ask and answer, Judge.
I will move on. You agree, would you not, Deputy Duff, that it is extremely important that you interview those witnesses initially very thoroughly in order to try to capture at a time that is freshest in their mind as much information as possible.
Yes, sir.
And you would agree as well that it is critical importance to ask that very first important question, and that is, have you talked to anybody about what you have seen, and or has anybody talked to you about what they have seen?
Yes, sir.
And you do that routinely, do you not?
In most cases, yes, sir.
But you didn't do it here,
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
Did not do it.
Did not.
Had you been given more information, you would have asked more questions.
That's a little speculative. I would assume that I would have more knowledge.
knowledge.
Correct. Yes, sir.
So certainly, you're a good officer, being given more knowledge, you're going to ask more detailed questions.
Yes, sir.
You also interviewed Mrs. Perez, correct?
Yes, sir.
Oh, and by the way, your interview of Mr. Perez was extremely short, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
And so then you interviewed Mrs. Perez.
Yes, sir.
Same format. Just tell me what you saw.
That's correct.
Never asked her for the lighting conditions?
No, sir.
Never asked her for the noise level?
No, sir.
Never asked her where she was specifically seated?
No, sir.
Never asked her specifically where the incident occurred?
No, sir.
You never even asked her who the shooter was.
Correct.
You interviewed Mr. Mickley the same way.
Yes, sir.
Didn't ask him what the lighting conditions were? Correct?
Correct.
And that's a pretty important statement, correct? To ask. Because if it's dark, it's harder to see, right?
Correct.
I mean, as an experienced officer, you realize that we get 80% of our information through our eyes.
Objection, speculation.
If he knows. Do you think in your training as a law enforcement officer, have they trained you that the most of the information that you get in order to perceive and to do things is through your eyes?
I don't recall any training with that specific. With 80%.
Well, What percentage were you taught? Majority?
I don't know where I would ever get a specific.
It's again speculation as to what percentage he was taught regarding where people get things.
Mr. Mickley, again, you didn't inquire about the noise level,
Correct.
where he was specifically seated.
Correct.
And you didn't have, and you never asked him for his written statement.
Correct.
And you never asked for Mrs. Perez's written statement either.
Correct.
Now, you would agree that's pretty fundamental. If someone has written a statement, before you start interviewing them, at the very least you want to read the statement.
Correct.
You didn't do that.
Correct.
Again, with Mr. Mickley and Mr. Scheck, which is your next one, merely said, oh, just tell me what you know.
Yes, sir.
Again, with Mr. Scheck, nothing about the lighting conditions, correct? No
Correct.
questions? No questions about the noise?
Correct.
No questions about specifically where he was seated?
Correct.
Didn't get his interview either. His written form, his written statement.
Okay. I did not get his written statement.
Mr. McCullum, same, tell me what you know.
Yes, sir.
Never asked him about the lighting conditions?
No, sir.
Never asked him about the noise level?
No, sir.
Never asked him about specifically where he was seated?
No, sir.
Never asked him to see his written statement?
No, sir.
And with all of these, you never asked him whether they had spoken to anyone who had told them anything about what they had seen inside the theater.
That's correct.
Mr. Stolmeyer, just tell me what you know. Right?
Yes, sir.
Never asked him for his statement form, correct?
Correct.
Never asked him what the lighting conditions were inside the theater at the time of his observations?
Correct.
Or the noise level?
Correct.
Or whether he had been spoken to by someone that may have shared some information with him?
Correct.
Your interview with Mr. Stolmeyer, like your interviews with all these 6 individuals, was extremely brief.
Can you put a time qualification on that, sir? I mean,
5 minutes? 10 minutes?
I'd say about 10 minutes, sir.
No further questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Please support Mr. Escobar. Good afternoon, Corporal Duff. How are you this afternoon?
Thank you. I'm good.
So you've been a law enforcement officer with the Pasco County Sheriff's Office for 11 years, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you were with Detective Morrison at some point around 1:37 on January 13th, 2014?
Yes, ma'am.
Where were you all at that time?
At the District 2 office?
Here in Dade City, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you specifically dispatched to the Cobb Theater?
No, ma'am.
Okay. You all just heard the call come out on the radio and took it upon yourselves to drive?
Yes, ma'am.
You rode in the same car together?
Detective Morrison, I did, yes, ma'am.
At what, let me ask you this, at that point, how long had you been in the property crimes unit?
2 years.
When you arrived, was it your sergeant, Sergeant Fields, that advised you to do things, or was he a sergeant for another property crimes unit?
Sergeant Fields was my supervisor at the time.
And had you previously been to the Cobb Theater
Yes, ma'am.
as a patron?
Yes, ma'am, and I've worked off-duty details there.
Approximately how many times have you worked off-duty details there?
I'd have to look at the records, but more than 10, I know that for sure.
More than 10?
Yes, ma'am.
And had you been in Theater 10 previously
Yes, ma'am.
as a patron and as an off-duty officer?
I don't recall as a patron specifically, but as an off-duty officer, part of the job was to walk through the theater, including Theater 10, to check on the theater.
And most of those theaters are substantially the same, aren't they?
Various sizing. I mean, they'll differ in the size of the auditorium, but they're about the same layout. Yes, ma'am.
Some have the Cine Bistro up top causing 3 sections, some only have 2 sections, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So when Mr. Escobar says that you didn't even go in the theater to look around, you'd been in all those theaters in the past. So it's not like you're going in cold and you have no idea what the interior of the theater looks like. Isn't that true, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
So when you started talking to these people and they're talking about the theater or the screen, you're familiar with that. You have working knowledge of that theater, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now you indicate that you got there, you walked into the theater, or into the entrance, into the concession area, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
How many tables did you see in the concession area?
I'm going to call the normal amount. I don't recall the specific number to tell you a specific number.
Okay, so you'd be guessing if you gave us a number.
Yes, ma'am.
Approximately how many people did you see in that concession area?
Again, I didn't count, but there was several people. I'd say probably north of 20.
Okay. When you say north of 20, more than 20?
More than 20, yes, ma'am.
The 6 people that you were tasked with interviewing, nobody told you, interview Luis Perez, Gladys Perez, Peter Stolmeyer, Major Bryant McCullum, David Schneck, or Jace Mikely. You
No,
just
ma'am.
randomly said, hey, I need to talk to somebody, and somebody jumped up?
I saw persons and went and spoke with them and then conducted the interviews until we were told to depart.
Okay, so did you pick the people, or did they stand up and come to you?
I think I picked the people, if I recall.
So you picked Luis Perez first, is that your recollection?
Yes, ma'am.
And where did you take Mr. Perez to be interviewed?
I spoke with Mr. Perez in the front sidewalk near the box office, which is the outside of the...
So you took him out of the concession area and out of the building, out front where they purchased their tickets, correct?
Correct. I don't remember if I took him out there, but I spoke with him out there. I don't remember.
Okay, well, that's semantics.
Okay.
Okay, the interview occurred outside.
The interview occurred
building.
outside. Yes, ma'am.
The interview occurred outside the hearing of other witnesses, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you did that for all 6 of the witnesses that you chose to interview, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, there was some talk about you not specifically telling the witnesses not to talk about it, right?
Yes, ma'am.
If you walked in and overheard witnesses discussing the facts of the shooting, what would you have done?
Separated them and advised them to...
Told them not to talk about
Yes,
it,
ma'am.
right? So is it safe to say that you didn't hear anybody talking about the facts of the shooting, or you would have told them stop talking about it, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you indicated that it was about a 10-minute interview per person.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall what time you left the theater?
Not specifically, ma'am.
And were these people holding on to their written statements?
Not that I can recall, ma'am.
If they had been holding their written statements, you would have said, oh, is that a written statement? Do you mind if I review that before we start our interview, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And no one advised you, hey, we've got a plethora of written statements.
No, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Any Reeves direct?
None,
May this be released?
Your Honor, we're going to keep them under subpoena, but in all likelihood, Deputy Duff, we won't need you.
Okay, and likewise state?
We'd ask that he remain under our subpoena, Your Honor.
Okay. Deputy, you're free to go today. Chances are good you won't be recalled, but you may. If you are, you have to return at your earliest convenience or at the direction of whoever calls you, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Deputy. Anybody else for today? All right.
It goes to show you how the process of leading shortens the time, because we didn't anticipate that necessarily, so I appreciate that for the board.
All right. Then we shall reconvene tomorrow at 8:30 at the theater.
Yes, Your Honor.
And again, that'll be counsel, and you're excusing Mr. Reeves' presence,
I am, Your Honor.
who, by the way, I've been meaning, I forget to do this when I don't have a jury, or Mr. Reeves has been present during the entire period of any formal court consideration, and
And those portions that he hasn't been, we've waived.
thank you. And there have been a few instances where we have had to discuss procedure and whatnot informally, that he has not been present.
Judge, I want to remind the court of being able to get the,
What number is it?
I believe, if my mind serves me
Teresa?
correct, is that 8? It may have been R8 or maybe.
Number 6. All right, that's the one. You want to look at it and make sure?
Yes.
Because I'm doing an order. I have to do an order for the clerk in order to transfer custody on that. That's it? All right, and that's going to go into my custody at the close of business today. And I will then transfer it to Mr. Shaw when we get to the movie theater, who will give it back to Madam Clerk at the end of your presentation, who will then transport it back to the premises. Uh-huh. I think so. He's, if not, he is. You're going to put it in the player or wherever. You're going to keep physical control of it, correct?
I'm going to keep physical control of it.
Okay.
Obviously, I'll be with an employee.
Right, of the movie
who knows
theater.
how to operate the device.
Right.
I'll stay there.
They're going to have someone there, Your Honor, to operate not only that particular DVD, but they're also going to operate the noise, the level of the preview volume, as well as the lighting.
Okay, and just since we're on the record, and I know the clerk is very protective of evidence, as they must be, in the event of some sort of damage off premises, the clerk will be relieved of any responsibility or liability.
The state has a copy of it, Your Honor.
Okay, good. All right, then we'll be covered.
And just one more thing. I've been advised by Mr. Grimaldi that neither he, Mrs. Olson, or Mr. Leal are going to go tomorrow either. So they're just
Okay, and I was going to
prosecuting
indicate
team.
that they were allowed to go, but otherwise.
They're gonna waive that.
Okay, thank you for that information. And otherwise, it is not going to be open to the public, and we will return here at the conclusion of business at the theater and resume at that time.
We have 2 witnesses, Your Honor. I'll give them that information before Mr. Garcia jumps up. It's going to be Dr. Adams, Bernard Adams, and Detective Proctor. That will take us through the day.
The day, all right.
And just logistically, what time do you anticipate? I know it's a 17-minute trailer pack. 9:45, 10 o'clock back here to be started, just for their purposes.
Yeah, any idea?
I think we just need to play by ear and see what, we're going to be there anyway. So
No
we'll be-
earlier than 9:45.
I would imagine if we're gonna be there at 8:30, and I know the movie theater will be anxious to get us out of there and on our way at our earliest convenience, I would anticipate approximately an hour there. And then half an hour, 40 minutes to get back, 45 minutes, depending on, 10 o'clock would probably be a ballpark figure. So for anyone who's interested in coming, please, the public is always welcome. This is your courthouse, your facilities, as it is everyone, all the taxpayers. So, any other matters that we need to address?
Nothing from the defense, Your Honor.
Nothing for the day, Your Honor.
Before I forget, please, counsel, be very mindful tomorrow. We're going to have a roving court reporter. She's not going to be able to be parked any particular place for any length of time, I would imagine. So please, if anything, which I try to keep everything on the record, any discussions, pause, look around, make sure she's ready. I know it's unnatural to do so, but please try to get into that habit. Most of you are accustomed to working with court reporters, but not so much in the roving manner. So give her an extra minute or two to make sure she's prepared. And it won't be. We're going to have Miss Dana tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay. Just please remember that. And I can't see any other issues that we need to cover.
But for record purposes, I would assume that you're going to put on the record the time that you're going to sit in Mr. Reeves' chair, and that, you know, the trailer is starting at such and such a time.
I'll say that, you know, but obviously court reporters typically keep a time when we start, do you not? Because I don't usually announce that on any proceeding.
We'll figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll certainly, and if I do not,
Judge, the clerk keeps it, I'm sure. Time
Yeah.
convened.
I don't typically do that on the record
I'm
that,
pretty sure the clerk keeps it on that.
all the in between. All right, and I've never had it be an issue before. But I'm sure in some type of litigation it might be, but I've never had it come up, and you can bet if I ever do, I'll from then on announce. Yes. All right, I think that's about it. And Mr. Garcia, in answer to that question as well, if you want me to make a record, please, and I fail to do so, please don't hesitate to bring it up, and we'll make sure it's
And I'll
clear.
speak with Mr. Escobar tomorrow, Judge.
I think we'll get a game plan together and we'll speak.
All
to
right. Any other matters that we need to address? Everybody's clear on where we're meeting at the movie theater at 8:30. I'll be bringing my bailiff and the chair, and the rest of you will kind of find your way there. And Mr. Reeves is not going to attend. He will be waiving his presence.
He will.
All right. All right, then we'll see everybody in the morning. Hope for better weather tomorrow than we had this morning. To be in recess.